There comes a moment when staying the same begins to hurt more than changing ever could. It doesn't arrive loudly. There is no announcement, no dramatic collapse. It shows up quietly, in the background of your life, as a persistent friction you can't explain away anymore. You wake up and nothing is technically wrong, yet something feels off. You move through familiar routines, speak to the same people, repeat the same habits, and still feel a subtle but constant weight pressing inward. This is not boredom. It is not restlessness. It is the feeling of having outgrown the version of yourself you are still living as. At first, you try to ignore it. You tell yourself you're tired. You blame circumstances, timing, other people. You assume the feeling will pass if you stay busy enough. But it doesn't pass. It sharpens. What once felt tolerable now feels misaligned. What once felt safe now feels limiting. The life you're living no longer fits the person you are becoming, and the mismatch creates tension. Not dramatic tension, but internal tension. The kind that drains you slowly. This is the beginning. Not of change, but of awareness. Most people don't recognize this moment for what it is. They mislabel it as dissatisfaction or impatience. But beneath the surface, something deeper is happening. Your internal compass has shifted. The values that once guided your decisions no longer carry the same weight. The identity you built to survive a previous chapter is no longer capable of carrying you forward. You haven't failed. You've evolved. And evolution always creates friction before it creates clarity. Stoic philosophy does not treat this moment as a crisis. It treats it as a signal. A sign that the structure of your inner life no longer matches reality. When there is misalignment between who you are and how you live, tension is inevitable. Not because something is broken, but because something is outdated. You feel it in small ways first. The conversations that once energize. Do you now feel empty? The goals that once motivated you no longer inspire effort. The habits you defend start to feel like compromises. You notice yourself going through motions instead of making choices. You are functioning, but not aligned. An alignment, once lost, cannot be replaced by comfort. This is where most people stop. They sense the friction but retreat from it. They cling to familiarity because familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. They convince themselves that this is just how life feels after a certain age, or that wanting more is unrealistic. But what they are really doing is protecting an identity that has already expired. The Stoics warned against this kind of stagnation. Not because stagnation is immoral, but because it is unnatural. Everything that lives is meant to grow or shed what no longer serves it. When growth is resisted, the cost is internal conflict. You begin to feel divided. One part of you knows something must change. Another part is afraid of what that change will require. This is the internal conflict most people never resolve. The conflict between the old identity and the future one. The version of you that knows the routines, the relationships, the patterns. And the version of you that senses there is more, but doesn't yet know how to reach it. This conflict creates exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, but psychological fatigue. You spend energy maintaining a version of yourself that no longer feels honest. You say yes when you mean no. You stay where you feel small because leaving would require courage. Over time, this quiet dishonesty with yourself becomes unbearable. That is when the pain of staying the same overtakes the fear of changing. This moment matters because it forces a choice. Not immediately, but eventually. You cannot live indefinitely in misalignment. You will either numb yourself to survive it, or confront it to outgrow it. Stoicism does not offer escape from this choice. It offers responsibility. Responsibility begins with recognition. Recognizing that the discomfort you feel is not an enemy. It is information. It tells you that the life you are living was built for a different version of you. And continuing to live it will require shrinking yourself to fit it. The Stoics believe that dignity comes from living in accordance with your nature. When your actions no longer reflect your inner values, dignity erodes. Not publicly, but privately. You lose respect for yourself in small ways. You notice it when you break promises to yourself and justify it. When you tolerate situations that drain you and call it loyalty. When you delay decisions that you now are necessary and call it patience. This is the cost of staying the same after you have outgrown yourself. There is no urgency here, and there is no drama. There is only honesty. An honest look at the growing gap between who you are and who you are pretending to be. This gap does not close on its own. It widens. And the longer it widens, the heavier it becomes. At this stage, you are not yet asked to act. You are only asked to see. To admit, quietly and without judgment, that something inside you no longer fits the life you are living. That the friction you feel is real. That the internal tension is not weakness, but awareness. Most people never get past this point because awareness demands responsibility. Once you see the misalignment, you can no longer unsee it. You may delay action, but the knowledge remains. And with it comes an unspoken question that grows louder with time. If you already know that this version of you cannot carry you forward, how long will you continue to protect it? This question does not require an answer yet. It only requires presence. Because before anything can be dismantled, it must be understood. Before the old identity can end, it must be fully seen. And that understanding does not come from noise, distraction, or external validation. It comes from silence. This is where the real work begins. Solitude is misunderstood because most people experience it only when it is forced upon them. A breakup. A move. A loss. A quiet house that wasn't chosen. In those moments, solitude feels like absence. Like something has been taken away. And so the mind learns to associate being alone with discomfort, rejection, or failure. But chosen solitude is something entirely different. It is not the lack of connection. It is the removal of interference. When you step away from constant input, from conversations that fill space but not meaning, from screens that keep your mind occupied but unfocused, something subtle happens. Your attention turns inward. Not dramatically. Gradually. And that inward turn is what most people spend their lives avoiding. Avoidance is easier when the world is loud. When there is always something playing, something to check, someone to respond to. Noise creates distance from the self. It allows you to stay busy without being present. And presence is uncomfortable when you haven't examined your inner life in a long time. Stoic philosophy treats solitude as a tool, not a punishment. A controlled environment where truth becomes harder to escape. In silence, there is no audience to perform for. No expectations to meet. No roles to play. The identity you wear in public loses its grip, and what remains is the unfiltered version of you. The one shaped by habits, fears, impulses, and beliefs you rarely question. This is why solitude feels confronting at first. Without distraction, the mind begins to surface patterns you've been running from. Unfinished thoughts. Suppressed regrets. Justifications you repeat to protect your comfort. In silence, these patterns don't shout. They linger. And because they linger, they demand attention. Most people interpret this discomfort as a sign that something is wrong. They rush back into noise to make it stop. But the Stoics understood that this discomfort is not a warning. It is clarity arriving. The mind, when finally given space, begins to show you the truth of your inner structure. You start to notice how often your decisions are reactive rather than intentional. How many of your habits exist not because they serve you, but because they are familiar. How much of your identity is shaped by external approval rather than internal alignment. These realizations are not gentle, but they are honest. Solitude removes the buffers that soften self-deception. When you are alone, excuses lose their persuasive power. The story that you don't have time begins to sound hollow. The belief that circumstances are the main obstacle starts to weaken. You see patterns more clearly because there is nothing to distract you from them. This clarity is uncomfortable because it places responsibility back where it belongs. Not on the past. Not on other people. Not on luck or timing. On you. And responsibility is heavy when you are not used to carrying it consciously. The Stoics did not seek solitude to escape life. They sought it to understand it. To examine their thoughts the way a craftsman examines tools. To ask which ones are useful and which ones cause harm. In solitude, you become both observer and observed. And this dual perspective is where real self-knowledge begins. You begin to see how your environment has shaped you. How certain behaviors are automatic responses rather than choices. How emotional triggers dictate actions you later regret. This is not self-criticism. It is exposure. And exposure, when approached without judgment, is transformative. Avoidance is common because self-confrontation threatens the comfort of the old identity. That identity survives by remaining unquestioned. It depends on routine, distraction, and external validation. Solitude strips these supports away. It reveals the structure underneath. And once revealed, that structure can no longer pretend to be solid if it isn't. Clarity does not arrive as a single insight. It arrives as a series of realizations that build on one another. You notice small inconsistencies first. Then larger ones. Eventually, you see the full pattern. The way your life is arranged reflects who you have been, not who you want to become. This is where solitude shifts from uncomfortable to necessary. Because without clarity, change is guesswork. You cannot dismantle what you cannot see. You cannot rebuild what you do not understand. Solitude gives you the blueprint of your inner life, flaws and all. The Stoics emphasized self-examination not as a moral exercise, but as a practical one. A person who understands themselves can act deliberately. A person who avoids themselves is always reacting. Solitude moves you from reaction to awareness. This awareness creates a subtle shift. You begin to feel less scattered. Less pulled in multiple directions. Not because answers have appeared, but because noise has disappeared. And in that quiet, the truth becomes harder to deny. Solitude does not tell you what to do. It shows you where you are. And that is its power. Once you see clearly, you cannot return to ignorance. You may choose delay, but the knowledge remains. And that knowledge quietly reshapes your priorities. This is the purpose of stepping away. Not to isolate, but to confront. Not to escape, but to examine. Solitude is the environment where self-confrontation becomes possible without distortion. Where clarity replaces confusion. Where avoidance loses its grip. And once you have seen yourself clearly, the next step becomes unavoidable. Because clarity creates pressure. Pressure to act. Pressure to end what no longer fits. That is where the dismantling begins. Once clarity has settled in, once you have seen yourself without distortion, there is a moment of stillness that follows. It is not relief. It is not fear either. It is recognition. You realize that what you are confronting is not a temporary phase or a passing mood. It is structural. The way you think, react, choose, and tolerate has been shaped over years. And that structure, as familiar as it feels, no longer supports the direction your life needs to move. This is where most people attempt compromise. They acknowledge the need for change, but only partially. They try to adjust behavior without challenging identity. They tweak routines while preserving the same reflexes. They promise themselves improvement while protecting the version of themselves that feels known. This is where transformation quietly fails. Stoic philosophy is uncompromising on this point. If the foundation is flawed, adding layers on top will not stabilize it. It will only delay collapse. The identity that carried you through one chapter of life is not guaranteed to carry you through the next. And clinging to it out of loyalty or fear is not strength. It is resistance to reality. Ending the old identity does not mean rejecting your past. It means recognizing that who you were was shaped by circumstances that no longer define you. Patterns that once served a purpose can become obstacles when they are left unquestioned. The way you respond to stress. The way you avoid discomfort. The way you seek validation or escape responsibility. These are not isolated habits. They are expressions of an identity. An identity is not an abstract concept. It is a collection of defaults. Automatic responses you rely on when you are tired, uncertain, or under pressure. These defaults feel natural because they are rehearsed. But familiarity does not equal alignment. An identity can feel comfortable and still be destructive. This is why partial change does not work. You cannot negotiate with reflexes that are wired into your sense of self. You cannot reason with patterns that operate beneath conscious intention. The old identity survives on ambiguity. On, maybe later, not yet, I'll try. These phrases sound reasonable, but they preserve the status quo. The Stoics emphasized finality because clarity demands it. To dismantle an identity, you must be willing to name what no longer belongs in your future. Not as a threat. Not as self-judgment. As fact. Certain behaviors, reactions, and beliefs cannot come with you. Not because they are morally wrong, but because they are structurally incompatible with where you are going. This realization is uncomfortable because it removes escape routes. Once you see which patterns are holding you back, you cannot unknow it. The old identity begins to feel heavy. Every time it asserts itself, you feel the tension. You notice the misalignment immediately. What once felt automatic now feels deliberate, and that awareness creates friction. This is the point of dismantling. Not dramatic destruction, but deliberate removal. You stop feeding certain behaviors. You stop justifying certain reactions. You stop giving energy to patterns that weaken your discipline and clarity. This is not punishment. It is precision. The Stoics understood that strength comes from subtraction as much as addition. Removing what is unnecessary restores balance. When you dismantle the old identity, you are not losing yourself. You are removing noise that has been mistaken for self. There is no aggression in this process. Aggression implies resistance. This process is calm, firm, and non-negotiable. You do not argue with the old identity. You simply stop obeying it. You recognize its voice, acknowledge its familiarity, and choose differently anyway. This is where finality matters. As long as the old identity believes it has a future, it will continue to assert itself. It will wait for moments of fatigue or doubt and reclaim control. Ending it requires clarity, not emotion. You decide which patterns no longer get access to your decisions. You stop treating them as negotiable. This decision reshapes your internal structure. At first, it feels empty. The old identity provided predictability, even when it limited you. Without it, there is space. Space can feel unsettling if you are not used to it. But space is necessary for reconstruction. Stoic philosophy teaches that freedom is not the ability to do anything, but the ability to act in accordance with reason. When the old identity is dismantled, reason regains authority. Choices become deliberate rather than habitual. You respond instead of react. You pause instead of repeat. This is not an overnight change. The old patterns will attempt to reassert themselves. Not maliciously, but habitually. Each time they do, you are given an opportunity to reinforce finality. Not with force, but with consistency. Ending the old identity is not an act of violence. It is an act of clarity. You are not destroying yourself. You are releasing a structure that no longer serves your growth. The relief that follows is subtle, but real. The internal noise begins to quiet. Decisions feel cleaner. Energy returns, not because life is easier, but because you are no longer divided against yourself. This is the necessary turning point. Without it, discomfort becomes chronic and progress remains superficial. With it, the groundwork is laid for something stronger, more stable, and more aligned to emerge. But dismantling alone is not enough. Once the old structure is removed, what remains must be trained. Because a life without discipline will simply rebuild the same patterns under a different name. That training begins where most people resist it. In discomfort. Discomfort is often misunderstood because it is usually introduced to us without context. As children, discomfort feels like a signal to stop. As adults, we are taught to manage it, numb it, or distract ourselves from it. Over time, the mind learns a simple rule: comfort equals safety, discomfort equals danger. This rule becomes deeply ingrained, and without realizing it, we begin organizing our lives around avoiding discomfort at all costs. But avoidance has consequences. When you dismantle the old identity, you remove the structures that once protected you from uncertainty. You no longer rely on familiar reactions. You no longer hide behind habits that dull awareness. What remains is a space where growth must occur. And growth, by its nature, introduces resistance. Stoic philosophy does not frame discomfort as something to be endured for its own sake. It frames it as a necessary signal of expansion. When the mind encounters resistance, it is often because it is being asked to operate beyond its previous limits. Discomfort is not evidence that something is wrong. It is evidence that adaptation is happening. This distinction matters. Without it, discomfort feels threatening. With it, discomfort becomes informative. Every meaningful capacity you possess was developed through some form of resistance. Physical strength is built by challenging muscles beyond their current capability. Mental resilience is built by confronting uncertainty without retreating. Emotional regulation is built by remaining present when emotions urge escape. In each case, the signal that growth is occurring is discomfort. The old identity avoided this signal. It sought comfort because comfort reinforced familiarity. Familiarity maintained predictability. Predictability preserved control. But control is not the same as growth. And a life organized solely around control becomes fragile when conditions change. The Stoics understood this fragility. That is why they voluntarily practiced discomfort, not as punishment, but as preparation. They trained themselves to experience hunger, cold, restraint, and uncertainty in controlled ways. Not to suffer, but to remove fear. When discomfort is chosen deliberately, it loses its power to destabilize. In modern life, discomfort appears differently. It shows up as the resistance you feel before starting something difficult. The unease of saying no when you are used to pleasing. The tension of acting without immediate validation. The strain of discipline when motivation fades. These moments are not obstacles to growth. They are the environment in which growth occurs. Avoiding discomfort keeps the old identity alive. Embracing it begins to weaken its hold. This does not mean seeking hardship indiscriminately. Stoicism is not about glorifying suffering. It is about using discomfort as a teacher. When resistance appears, the question is not how to eliminate it, but what it is asking you to develop. Discomfort reveals where your limits currently are. If something feels challenging, it is because it sits at the edge of your capacity. Repeated exposure, approached calmly and consistently, expands that edge. Over time, what once felt uncomfortable becomes neutral. And what once felt impossible becomes manageable. This is adaptation in action. Emotionally, discomfort teaches regulation. When you stay present instead of escaping, emotions lose their ability to control behavior. Mentally, discomfort teaches focus. When distractions are removed, attention strengthens. Behaviorally, discomfort teaches discipline. When you act despite resistance, identity begins to shift. The old self was built in environments that rewarded avoidance. The new self is built in moments that require endurance. Not endurance as endurance itself, but endurance as commitment to alignment. Each time you choose to remain present through discomfort, you reinforce a new internal rule: growth matters more than ease. This rule changes how you interpret effort. Effort stops feeling like sacrifice and starts feeling like investment. The temporary strain of doing what is difficult becomes acceptable because it serves something larger than comfort. Over time, this reframing reduces internal conflict. You stop arguing with yourself about whether something is worth doing. You do it because it aligns with who you are becoming. Discomfort also strips away illusion. When things are easy, it is difficult to tell whether you are acting from conviction or convenience. When things are hard, your priorities become clear. You learn what you are willing to endure for, and what you are not. This clarity sharpens identity. The Stoics emphasized preparation over reaction. They believe that a person who trains themselves to tolerate discomfort voluntarily becomes resilient when discomfort is unavoidable. This resilience is quiet. It does not seek recognition. It manifests as steadiness under pressure. As you move through this phase, you may notice resistance intensifying before it fades. This is normal. The mind resists change most strongly when change is working. The old patterns sense loss of control and attempt to reassert themselves. Not because they are malicious, but because they are familiar. Each time you choose discomfort instead of retreat, you weaken these patterns. Gradually, the resistance softens. The discomfort remains, but it becomes manageable. You begin to trust yourself to endure it. And trust is foundational to identity. This is where the new self begins to take shape. Not in moments of inspiration, but in moments of choice. The choice to act without reassurance. To remain consistent without applause. To move forward even when certainty is absent. Discomfort becomes less about pain and more about direction. It points you toward areas that require development. Areas that, once strengthened, will support the life you are rebuilding. But discomfort alone is not enough. Without it becomes chaotic. Without consistency, it becomes sporadic. To transform resistance into stability, something else must take root. That something is discipline. Motivation is appealing because it feels like clarity. When it arrives, everything seems possible. Energy rises. Vision sharpens. The future feels close. But motivation is not stable. It responds to mood, environment, sleep, validation, and circumstance. It comes easily when things feel aligned and disappears the moment resistance appears. Building a life on motivation is like building on weather. It may carry you forward for a moment, but it will not hold you steady. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology gave it language. They observed that feelings fluctuate, but character endures. And character is shaped not by what you feel in a moment, but by what you choose repeatedly. This is where discipline becomes essential. Not as restriction, but as structure. Discipline is misunderstood because it is often associated with punishment or force. In reality, discipline is simply the decision to act according to reason rather than impulse. It is the framework that allows intention to survive distraction. Where motivation asks how you feel, discipline asks who you are choosing to be. When the old identity is dismantled and discomfort is accepted, discipline becomes the stabilizing force that prevents regression. Without it, the mind defaults to familiar patterns under pressure. With it, behavior remains consistent even when conditions change. Discipline builds identity through repetition. Each time you act in alignment with your values, you reinforce a particular version of yourself. Over time, these actions stop feeling like effort and start feeling like expression. You are no longer forcing behavior. You are embodying it. This is why discipline outlasts motivation. Motivation initiates change. Discipline sustains it. Motivation may get you to start, but discipline determines whether you continue. And continuation is what reshapes identity. From a psychological perspective, repetition strengthens neural pathways. The behaviors you repeat become easier, more automatic, and less emotionally taxing. This is not willpower. It is adaptation. Discipline accelerates this process by reducing reliance on emotional state. You act because it is time to act, not because you feel ready. The Stoics practice daily routines not to rigidly control life, but to stabilize it. Writing, reflection, physical training, restraint. These were not dramatic acts. They were consistent ones. Through consistency, the mind learns reliability. And reliability builds self-trust. Self-trust matters more than confidence. Confidence fluctuates. Self-trust endures. When you trust yourself to follow through regardless of mood, uncertainty loses its power. You no longer need to feel inspired to act. Action becomes normal. Discipline also simplifies decision-making. When standards are clear, choices require less negotiation. You stop debating with yourself about whether to do what you already know is necessary. This reduces internal friction. Energy that was once spent on hesitation becomes available for execution. The old identity thrived on ambiguity. It survived in the space between intention and action. Discipline collapses that space. It replaces vague intention with defined structure. Over time, this structure becomes internalized. You do not feel constrained by it. You feel supported by it. This support is subtle but profound. When life becomes unpredictable, discipline provides continuity. When emotions fluctuate, discipline provides direction. When external validation disappears, discipline provides grounding. The goal is not to become rigid. Stoicism values adaptability. But adaptability without structure becomes inconsistency. Discipline provides the baseline from which flexibility becomes possible. You can adjust without collapsing. Many people resist discipline because they associate it with loss of freedom. In reality, the opposite is true. Discipline frees you from dependence on impulse, distraction, and circumstance. It allows you to choose long-term alignment over short-term relief. Each disciplined action is a quiet declaration. A declaration that your future matters more than momentary comfort. That your values are not conditional. That the new identity you are building is not theoretical. Over time, discipline reshapes your internal narrative. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries and start seeing yourself as someone who follows through. This shift is not loud, but it is permanent. Identity follows behavior. This is the foundation of rebuilding yourself. Not dramatic effort, but consistent action. Not bursts of intensity, but steady repetition. The structure you build now determines whether the changes you make endure. But discipline does not exist in isolation. It is influenced by context. Reinforced or undermined by surroundings. Even the strongest internal structure can erode if the external environment constantly pulls against it. This is why the next step matters. You do not exist in a vacuum. No matter how disciplined you become, no matter how clear your intentions are, your environment is always shaping your behavior in subtle ways. This influence is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It operates quietly, through exposure, repetition, and proximity. And because it is quiet, it is often underestimated. Stoic philosophy placed great importance on understanding what lies within your control and what does not. Your environment sits in a unique position. You may not control everything about it, but you are responsible for how much access it has to you. This responsibility becomes critical when you are rebuilding yourself. Your surroundings influence your thoughts before you are aware of them. The spaces you spend time in, the people you interact with, the information you consume, and the routines you repeat all shape your internal state. Over time, these influences accumulate. They reinforce certain behaviors and weaken others. They either support alignment or quietly pull you back toward old patterns. The old identity was formed in a specific environment. Certain habits were normalized. Certain distractions were encouraged. Certain reactions were rewarded. Even if that environment no longer fits you, it still carries a gravitational pull. Familiar surroundings invite familiar behavior. This is not a moral failure. It is conditioning. Rebuilding yourself requires recognizing this conditioning without resentment. The goal is not to blame your environment, but to understand its influence. Once you understand it, you can begin to redesign it with intention. Physical space is often the most visible factor, yet it is rarely treated seriously. Cluttered spaces create mental noise. Disordered environments make focus more difficult. This is not symbolic thinking. It is neurological. The brain processes visual information constantly. When the environment is chaotic, cognitive load increases. Decision fatigue sets in more quickly. Discipline becomes harder to maintain, not because you are weak, but because your attention is fragmented. Creating order in your physical space reduces friction. It removes unnecessary choices. It signals to the mind that clarity is expected here. This does not require perfection. It requires alignment. A space that supports focus, rest, and intentional action makes disciplined behavior easier to sustain. Digital environments are even more influential because they are persistent. Notifications, feeds, and constant information streams train the brain toward distraction. They shorten attention spans. They reinforce impulsive behavior. Over time, they weaken your ability to remain present with difficulty. The Stoics did not contend with digital noise, but they understood the principle behind it. What you repeatedly expose yourself to becomes familiar. What becomes familiar begins to feel normal. And what feels normal shapes your expectations of yourself and others. Reducing digital exposure is not about rejection. It is about selectivity. You choose what enters your mind because your mind is the primary tool you are rebuilding with. Allowing constant interruption undermines the discipline you are trying to cultivate. Social environments carry the deepest influence because they shape identity through comparison and reinforcement. The people around you reflect back who you are. D.To.Be. If your environment rewards distraction, excuses, or stagnation, resisting those patterns requires constant effort. If your environment respects boundaries, focus, and growth, alignment becomes natural. This is why awareness matters. You begin to notice which interactions leave you grounded and which leave you scattered. Which conversations expand your perspective and which drain your energy. This noticing is not judgment. It is data. The Stoics emphasized intentional association. Not isolation, but discernment. Who you spend time with matters because behavior is contagious. Emotional states transfer. Standards transfer. Over time, your environment trains you, whether you intend it to or not. When rebuilding yourself, you are more sensitive to influence. Old patterns are easier to trigger. New habits are still fragile. This is not weakness. It is a transitional state. Protecting your environment during this period is an act of responsibility, not arrogance. Alignment becomes the guiding principle. Does this space support the person you are becoming? Does this routine reinforce discipline or distraction? Does this interaction encourage clarity or confusion? These questions do not require immediate action. They require honesty. You may find that certain environments are incompatible with your growth. Places where your old identity feels comfortable. Situations that invite old habits. This realization can be uncomfortable, especially when those environments once felt like home. But growth often requires distance. Not permanent withdrawal, but temporary protection. Changing your environment does not mean escaping responsibility. It means creating conditions where responsibility can be practiced consistently. You do not fight gravity. You work with it. When your surroundings support your intentions, effort decreases and consistency increases. Over time, this alignment compounds. Small changes in environment produce noticeable shifts in behavior. Focus becomes easier. Discipline feels less forced. The new identity gains stability. This is not about control. It is about coherence. Your internal values and external surroundings begin to match. When they do, progress stops feeling like struggle and starts feeling like direction. But there is one environment that is often the most difficult to change. The social one. The relationships that formed around an earlier version of you. These relationships carry history, expectation, and emotional weight. Navigating this requires care. Outgrowing people is one of the most misunderstood parts of personal transformation. It is often framed as betrayal, arrogance, or abandonment. In reality, it is a natural consequence of Hang. When you shift internally, the dynamics around you change as well. Not because you intend them to, but because relationships are built on shared patterns. When those patterns no longer exist, tension appears. This tension is subtle at first. Conversations feel different. The rhythm is off. Topics that once bonded you now feel repetitive or shallow. You notice yourself holding back, not out of superiority, but out of misalignment. You are no longer speaking from the same place. And yet, walking away feels heavy. Guilt creeps in. Loyalty whispers that you should stay the same for the sake of others. Stoic philosophy does not treat relationships as obligations to stagnation. It treats them as living systems. Systems that evolve or dissolve based on alignment. When growth occurs, distance often follows. Not as punishment. Not as rejection. As consequence. When rebuilding yourself, you are more sensitive to influence. Old patterns are easier to trigger. New habits are still fragile. This is not weakness. It is a transitional state. Protecting your environment during this period is an act of responsibility, not arrogance. Alignment becomes the guiding principle. Does this space support the person you are becoming? Does this routine reinforce discipline or distraction? Does this interaction encourage clarity or confusion? These questions do not require immediate action. They require honesty. You may find that certain environments are incompatible with your growth. Places where your old identity feels comfortable. Situations that invite old habits. This realization can be uncomfortable, especially when those environments once felt like home. But growth often requires distance. Not permanent withdrawal, but temporary protection. Changing your environment does not mean escaping responsibility. It means creating conditions where responsibility can be practiced consistently. You do not fight gravity. You work with it. When your surroundings support your intentions, effort decreases and consistency increases. Over time, this alignment compounds. Small changes in environment produce noticeable shifts in behavior. Focus becomes easier. Discipline feels less forced. The new identity gains stability. This is not about control. It is about coherence. Your internal values and external surroundings begin to match. When they do, progress stops feeling like struggle and starts feeling like direction. But there is one environment that is often the most difficult to change. The social one. The relationships that formed around an earlier version of you. These relationships carry history, expectation, and emotional weight. Navigating this requires care. Outgrowing people is one of the most misunderstood parts of personal transformation. It is often framed as betrayal, arrogance, or abandonment. In reality, it is a natural consequence of Hang. When you shift internally, the dynamics around you change as well. Not because you intend them to, but because relationships are built on shared patterns. When those patterns no longer exist, tension appears. This tension is subtle at first. Conversations feel different. The rhythm is off. Topics that once bonded you now feel repetitive or shallow. You notice yourself holding back, not out of superiority, but out of misalignment. You are no longer speaking from the same place. And yet, walking away feels heavy. Guilt creeps in. Loyalty whispers that you should stay the same for the sake of others. Stoic philosophy does not treat relationships as obligations to stagnation. It treats them as living systems. Systems that evolve or dissolve based on alignment. When growth occurs, distance often follows. Not as punishment. Not as rejection. As consequence. Most people struggle here because they confuse growth with judgment. They believe that stepping away implies looking down on others. But growth does not require comparison. It requires honesty. You are not rejecting people. You are acknowledging that the version of you they are connected to is no longer present. This realization brings discomfort because it challenges deeply ingrained social conditioning. You are taught to equate loyalty with consistency. To believe that changing yourself means abandoning others. But this belief creates an impossible standard. It asks you to sacrifice your evolution to preserve familiarity. The Stoics emphasized integrity over approval. Integrity does not mean isolation. It means alignment between values and behavior. When relationships no longer align with who you are becoming, maintaining them requires compromise. Not compromise in small ways, but compromise of self-respect. This is where boundaries become essential. Boundaries are not walls. They are definitions. They clarify what behavior you will accept and what you will no longer participate in. Establishing boundaries often feels uncomfortable because it disrupts expectations. People may react with confusion, resistance, or guilt-inducing language. This is not always malicious. It is human. Change challenges the stability of social roles. Outgrowing people does not mean erasing shared history. It means recognizing that history alone cannot justify continued misalignment. You can appreciate what was without forcing it to continue. Gratitude and distance are not mutually exclusive. Emotionally mature growth requires compassion. Compassion for others, but also for yourself. You may feel sadness when relationships change. That sadness does not mean you are making the wrong choice. It means you are acknowledging loss honestly. Growth often includes grief. Grief for who you were. Grief for connections that cannot evolve with you. The Stoics understood impermanence. They did not CLI into what could not remain. They believed suffering comes from attachment to what must change. Relationships, like all things, are subject to this law. Some are meant to evolve. Some are meant to conclude. What matters is how you handle this transition. Without hostility. Without superiority. Without justification. You do not need to convince others to understand your path. You only need to walk it with integrity. As you grow, some people will interpret your boundaries as rejection. Others will see your discipline as distance. This is not something you can control. What you can control is your response. Calm. Respectful. Clear. You do not argue your evolution. You live it. This shift often reveals which relationships are resilient and which were dependent on your former patterns. Those who are meant to remain will adapt. They will meet you where you are going. Those who cannot will drift away. Not because you pushed them, but because alignment no longer exists. This process is quieter than most people expect. There is rarely confrontation. More often, there is space. Conversations become less frequent. Interaction becomes intentional rather than habitual. Over time, the relationship finds its natural distance. This distance creates room. Room for new connections. Room for relationships built on shared values rather than shared stagnation. As your internal standards rise, your external circle adjusts accordingly. Outgrowing people is not an act of ego. It is an act of responsibility. Responsibility to your growth. Responsibility to your future. Responsibility to the integrity you are rebuilding. You do not need to explain this to everyone. You do not need to announce it. Quiet consistency communicates more than words ever could. When you stop shrinking yourself to maintain comfort, your presence changes. And that change attracts different energy. Some people will remember you as someone who changed. Let them. Change was necessary. Evolution was the point. Remaining the same would have been the real betrayal. Betrayal of your potential. Betrayal of the clarity you worked to gain. Releasing relationships that no longer align is not cruelty. It is clarity. And clarity creates space for something new to take shape. That shape is not built in a single decision. It is built in daily choices. Rebirth is often imagined as a single moment. A breakthrough. A decisive shift after which everything feels different. This belief is comforting because it suggests that transformation can be completed quickly, that effort has an endpoint. But real change does not work that way. Stoic philosophy rejects the idea of sudden arrival. It frames transformation as a practice, not an event. What you rebuild is not a persona. It is a pattern of choices repeated often enough to become natural. The old identity did not form overnight. It was shaped gradually, through thousands of small decisions made under pressure, fear, convenience, or habit. The new identity must be formed the same way. Slowly. Deliberately. Through repetition. This is where many people lose momentum. They expect clarity to remove effort. They believe that once they understand themselves, acting differently will feel easy. When it does not, they assume something is wrong. In reality, what they are experiencing is the normal process of rewiring behavior. Each day presents the same quiet question: will you act from the old pattern or the new one? There is nothing dramatic about this choice. It appears in ordinary moments. How you begin the day. How you respond to frustration. How you manage your attention. How you speak when you feel defensive. These moments do not announce their importance, but they accumulate. Stoicism emphasizes integrity because integrity is built through consistency. It is the alignment between what you value and what you do when no one is watching. This alignment does not require perfection. It requires honesty. You will falter. Old patterns will resurface. This does not mean you have failed. It means you are human. The difference now is awareness. When an old pattern appears, you recognize it. You see the impulse before it becomes action. This pause is where choice lives. Each time you choose differently, even imperfectly, you weaken the old identity's hold. Repetition matters more than intensity. A single disciplined action does not transform you. 100 quiet ones do. Over time, these actions create momentum. Momentum reduces friction. What once required effort begins to feel normal. This is how rebirth unfolds. Not as a replacement, but as a gradual shift in default behavior. You do not wake up one day as someone else. You wake up as someone who responds differently. The Stoics understood this patience. They believed character is revealed in what you do repeatedly, not occasionally. Daily practices, however small, shape the mind. Reflection. Restraint. Focus. These are not symbolic gestures. They are training. Training requires commitment without constant reward. There will be days when progress feels invisible. Days when discipline feels heavy. Days when the old identity feels close. These days matter most. They are where identity is reinforced. When you act in alignment on difficult days, you teach yourself something important, that your values are not conditional. This builds self-respect. Self-respect deepens commitment. Commitment sustains change. Rebirth also requires forgiveness. Not indulgence, but realism. You cannot rebuild while constantly punishing yourself for imperfection. The Stoics believed in learning from missteps without attachment. When you fall back briefly, you correct course. You do not collapse into self-judgment. Each day offers a clean opportunity. Not because the past disappears, but because the present is where action happens. You are not defined by yesterday's choices unless you repeat them today. Over time, something subtle shifts. The new behaviors stop feeling forced. They feel familiar. The old patterns feel distant. Not gone, but less persuasive. This is evidence of integration. Integration means the new identity is no longer something you are trying to become. It is something you are practicing. And practice, when sustained, becomes character. This is why rebirth must be daily. Not because change is fragile, but because identity is maintained through action. Each day you choose alignment, you reinforce direction. Each day you choose awareness, you strengthen integrity. There is no finish line here. There is only continuity. The goal is not to arrive, but to remain aligned. To return to clarity when distraction pulls you away. To choose deliberately when impulse invites retreat. Rebirth is not dramatic. It is disciplined. It is quiet. It is cumulative. And when practiced long enough, it becomes irreversible. Because at a certain point, the old identity no longer fits at all. Acting from it feels unnatural. The new identity becomes the default. You no longer ask who you are becoming. You are living it. This is the threshold. Beyond it, there is one final reckoning. Not with behavior, not with environment, not with others, but with ownership. There is a moment in this process that cannot be rushed and cannot be skipped. It does not arrive with excitement. It arrives with stillness. After the habits have been questioned, after the environment has been reshaped, after relationships have shifted and daily discipline has taken root, you reach a quiet reckoning. A moment where you realize that the old identity no longer governs your actions, but it has not fully disappeared either. This is the space between who you were and who you are now. It is here that the final release happens. The old self does not vanish through force. It fades through ownership. You stop blaming circumstances. You stop resenting the past. You stop waiting for permission. What remains is a clear understanding that your life, as it is now and as it will become, is authored by you. Not in theory. In practice. Stoic philosophy places enormous weight on this realization. Not because it is empowering in an emotional sense, but because it is stabilizing. When you accept authorship of your life, excuses lose their function. Regret loses its sharpness. Fear loses its authority. You see clearly that every version of yourself you have lived was shaped by choices made under specific conditions. And you see just as clearly that those conditions no longer define you. This clarity can feel heavy. Responsibility always does. There is no one left to argue with internally. No version of yourself to negotiate with. No old pattern to hide behind. What remains is the present moment and the knowledge that your response to it matters. This is where the identity breakdown completes itself. You no longer defend the old self. You no longer justify it. You acknowledge it for what it was, a necessary construction for a previous chapter. You recognize the skills it gave you, the resilience it built, the lessons it taught. And then you release it. Release is not rejection. It is resolution. You stop carrying the emotional weight of who you used to be. You stop measuring yourself against outdated standards. You stop explaining your growth to people who cannot follow it. The internal tension that once defined your days dissolves, not because life is easier, but because you are no longer divided. This is the moment when ownership becomes complete. You see that no single decision transformed you. A series of choices did. You see that no one else was responsible for your stagnation or your growth. Both were shaped by what you tolerated and what you changed. This realization is not harsh. It is clarifying. Clarity creates calm. The Stoics believed that peace is not found by avoiding difficulty, but by accepting reality without resistance. The reality here is simple. You are responsible for your character. Not your past. Not other people. Not circumstances beyond your control. Your character. And character is lived, not declared. When this truth settles in, something shifts internally. The urge to prove yourself fades. The need for validation quiets. You are no longer trying to become someone. You are simply acting in accordance with who you are now. This is the end of the old identity. Not through destruction, but through completion. There is no drama here. No triumph. Just a steady sense of alignment. The feeling that your thoughts, actions, and values are finally moving in the same direction. The friction that once consumed you is gone because there is nothing left to resist. You own your life now. Fully. Without resentment. Without illusion. And from this ownership, something stable emerges. Not a new persona, but an integrated self. One that does not require constant reinforcement because it is supported by consistent action. This is not the end of the journey. It is the point at which the journey becomes sustainable. From here, what follows is not struggle, but continuation. The work does not intensify. It simplifies. You maintain what you have built. You return to alignment when you drift. You act with intention because intention is now habitual. This is where rebuilding becomes living. What remains after the reckoning is not a sense of arrival, but a sense of steadiness. There is no sudden feeling of completion, no moment where life becomes effortless. Instead, there is alignment. The quiet understanding that your actions are no longer working against your values. That your days are no longer spent managing internal conflict. That the energy once lost to hesitation, justification, and self-avoidance has been reclaimed. This is the quiet power the Stoics spoke of. Not dominance over others, but composure within yourself. The ability to meet life as it is, without needing to distort it to protect your ego. You no longer seek intensity. You seek direction. Direction simplifies everything. When your internal compass is aligned, decisions become cleaner. Not easier, but clearer. You know what deserves your attention and what does not. You recognize which discomforts are necessary and which compromises are not. This clarity does not eliminate uncertainty, but it prevents paralysis. There is dignity in this state. Dignity that comes from self-respect earned through consistency. You are no longer trying to escape who you are or chase who you think you should be. You are living deliberately, one choice at a time, aware that each choice reinforces the structure you have built. Stoic philosophy does not promise happiness as an outcome. It promises coherence. A life where your thoughts, actions, and values are not at war with each other. In that coherence, peace becomes possible. Not as an emotion, but as a condition. You will still face pressure. You will still encounter moments of doubt. Old impulses may resurface occasionally. This is not failure. It is part of being human. The difference now is how you respond. You no longer panic at the presence of resistance. You recognize it. You adjust. You continue. Continuation is the real work. You do not need to announce your transformation. You do not need to explain it. Your presence will speak for you. The way you move through difficulty. The way you maintain boundaries without hostility. The way you commit to what matters without seeking approval. These are the signals of a rebuilt self. There is a subtle confidence that comes from this. Not the confidence of certainty, but the confidence of self-trust. You trust yourself to act in alignment even when conditions are imperfect. You trust yourself to correct course without collapsing into self-judgment. This trust is more valuable than motivation could ever be. As time passes, the distance between who you were and who you are grows wider. Not because you are trying to escape the past, but because the present demands different standards. You do not carry resentment toward the old version of yourself. You recognize it as a necessary step. But you do not return to it. This is what it means to rebuild yourself alone. Not in isolation, but in ownership. Alone in the sense that responsibility is no longer outsourced. You no longer wait for circumstances to change before you act. You change how you act, and circumstances respond accordingly. There is no finish line here. No moment where the work ends. But there is stability. A sense that the foundation you have built will hold under pressure. That you can face uncertainty without losing yourself. The Stoics believe that life is shaped not by what happens to you, but by how you meet what happens. You have learned to meet it with clarity. With discipline. With restraint. With intention. And in doing so, you have not become someone else. You have returned to yourself. There is one final truth worth carrying forward. A quiet reminder to anchor everything you have built. You do not rise by destroying who you were. You rise by taking responsibility for who you are becoming. Move forward with dignity. Maintain alignment. Continue deliberately. Your future is not waiting for you. It is being built by you.